Loki fled to a remote mountain, climbed a peak, and built himself a dwelling with 4 doors. Behind them, he sat by the fire, peering in all directions, pondering how the Asgardians might catch him. In the mornings, he often ran to the nearby waterfall, transformed into a salmon, and hid in the current. Odin ascended Hlidskjalf daily, watching for Loki until he spotted him from his abode. Odin alone would hardly succeed in capturing the cunning one, so he took Thor and Heimdall with him on his journey. Loki warmed himself by his fire and occasionally peered out from one of the 4 doors. Then he knotted linen yarn and, out of boredom, tied the meshes into a special net. He was startled by his invention, and even more so when he saw the 3 Asgardians climbing up the slope. Loki threw the net into the fire, ran in another direction, to the river, and transformed into a salmon. Odin and his companions entered the house, saw the blazing fire, and suspected Loki couldn't be far. Heimdall recognized in the embers of the fire the shape of a net, made of the white ash of the burnt knotted linen yarn. "One can catch fish with that," he exclaimed, and Loki would have transformed into such an animal, Odin surmised. Ample linen yarn lay in a corner, and the Asgardians quickly knotted a net, following the pattern they deciphered from the ash. Then they hurried to the river and cast the net into the waterfall, over which Loki could not have escaped. Thor held one end of the net, and the others grasped the second end on the opposite shore. Thus, they dragged the net downstream. Loki swam unnoticed ahead of them, finding no other hiding place, and lay down between 2 stones. When the Asgardians pulled the net over the stones, they felt something alive, went back to the waterfall, weed down the net so it offered no escape, and pulled it downstream a second time. Before reaching the sea, Loki, in the form of a salmon, leaped over the edge of the net and swam back to the waterfall. Now the Asgardians believed they knew who hid behind the fish and ran back to the waterfall. There, they lowered the net into the river for the 3rd time. Odin held the net on one side, Heimdall on the other, and they pulled it, while Thor stood in the middle of the stream. The Asgardians pushed Loki towards the sea. The sly one was subject to the laws of transformation. He would have to reassume his natural, humanoid form before he could turn into a fly and buzz away. Thus, Loki was left with only 2 options, each threatening his life, being chased into the sea or leaping over the rope holding the net. Loki darted as quickly as he could over the line, but Thor had been watching the fish and focused all his senses on him, causing the splinter of the wet stone in his head to ache. Thor's fingers were quicker than a leaping salmon. They grabbed and held him. The salmon was slippery, writhing, and almost escaped, but Thor firmly squeezed it by the tail. That's why salmon's tails are so narrow. Loki had to transform back into his natural form and was now outlawed. The Asgardians dragged him into a cave. His sons Narfi and Vali, whom Loki had fathered with Sigyn, were also captured and brought to this place. The gods took 3 stone slabs, drilled a hole in each, and set them up on the edges. Since Loki, like the Fenris wolf, could not be bound with ordinary fetters, the Asgardians transformed Loki's son Vali into a wolf and set him upon his brother. Narfi was torn apart by him. Then, the Asgardians laid Loki on the vertical stone slabs and bound him with the entrails of his son Narfi. One stone slab pressed against Loki's shoulders, the second against his loins, and the third against his knee pits, and the bonds turned into particularly hard iron. Skadi, a goddess, placed a venomous snake above Loki, its poison dripping onto his face. However, Loki's wife Sigyn did not leave her bound husband's side. She stood next to Loki, holding a bowl under the snake's head. When the bowl was full, Sigyn went to pour out the poison, but in the meantime, it dripped onto the bound Loki's face, scorching it. Loki twitched so violently and tugged at his bonds that the earth trembled and the ground shook. This is what is known as an earthquake. In this cave, Loki lay bound until Ragnarok, and the longer the poison burned his face, the more he hated the gods and shook their world order.